Greetings, everyone, and welcome to what I'm sure will be a fascinating conversation today between Zikode and Dr. Ruth Wilson Gilmore. The title of today's event is Abahlali as a Movement of Dignity and Courage. My name is Yusuf Al-Balushi, and I teach in the Department of Global and International Studies here at the University of California, Irvine. Today's event is the spring keynote for a year-long Sawyer seminar at UC Irvine, supported by the Mellon Foundation. Our seminar theme is Black Reconstruction as a Portal, and we've been exploring the global salience of visions of Black Reconstruction as a portal between the crisis that marks our current predicament and the freedom dreams of those who've been taken to the streets, insisting that another world is still possible. Additional upcoming virtual seminar events next week include a dialogue next Thursday with activists working with Reconocido, who are challenging La Sentencia and the condition of statelessness imposed on Dominicans of Haitian descent in the Dominican Republic. And next Friday, we'll be hosting a talk by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, who will be speaking on the other war that killed Reconstruction, highlighting the continued genocide of Native peoples and its neglect and histories of Reconstruction. So look out for more information about that event on our Twitter account at Reading Du Bois. I need to thank my comrade and co-director of the seminar, Damien Sojourner from UCI's Department of Anthropology. We want to thank Melissa Valdez and Monica Rodriguez in the School of Social Sciences for all of their help organizing this event, as well as our postdoctoral fellow, Marilyn Grell-Brisk, and our PhD student fellows, Temitope Famodu in Global Studies, and Meryl Rowland in Culture and Theory. And we also want to thank Amanda Swain and Ekwa Arhin in the UCI Humanities Center. There's so much that we could say about our two distinguished speakers today, but for the sake of time, I will try my best to keep it brief. Zikode is president of Abahlali baseMjondolo, a social movement of shack dwellers which began in 2005 in Durban, South Africa. Abahlali fights for land, housing, and dignity. Today, it's one of the most prominent and enduring movements on the African continent. Abahlali fights for the landless poor in South Africa, highlighting the failure of the post-apartheid ANC-led government to follow through on the anti-apartheid movement's demand for significant land redistribution. They've built incredible networks of solidarity within and beyond South Africa, linking up with migrants in the country who are often the target of state-induced violence, and connecting with movements in other parts of the world, from Swaziland to Zambia, from Palestine to Brazil. Zikode and other members of Abahlali have paid a high price for their activism, and the group has suffered numerous assassinations. To date, 24 activists in the organization have lost their lives fighting for dignity in their communities. Zikode himself has had to go into hiding numerous times, stay in safe houses, and has sometimes even had to go abroad temporarily for his safety. In 2021, he received the Per Anger Prize, awarded by the Swedish government for humanitarian work and initiatives in the name of democracy, and he dedicated that prize to the fallen comrades of Abahlali. Zikode has been invited to speak about the movement in dozens of countries across the world, and you can find writings by him and by Abahlali at their website, which is abahlali.org. I'll put that in the chat for everyone. Dr. Ruth Wilson Gilmore is an abolitionist, scholar, and organizer. She teaches in the PhD program of Earth and Environmental Sciences at the City University of New York, where she's also the director of the Center for Place, Culture, and Politics. You can also check out some of the incredible work they're doing at the center, including recent gatherings very related to today's topic, on their website, which we'll also put in the chat. Dr. Gilmore is the author of numerous field-defining articles and book chapters, and of the prize-winning book, Golden Gulag, Prison, Surplus, Crisis, and Opposition in Globalizing California with UC Press. of Abolition Geographies, Essays Towards Liberation with Verso, and of the forthcoming Change Everything, Racial Capitalism and the Case for Abolition, which will be out with Haymarket, and we're all really excited to see that book. Together with Paul Gilroy, she co-edited Stuart Hall, Selected Writings on Race and Difference with Duke. And as if all of that wasn't enough, Dr. Gilmore is also the co-founder of many grassroots organizations, including the California Prison Moratorium Project, Critical Resistance, and the Central California Environmental Justice Network. So the format for today's event will be a conversation between these two distinguished thinkers, followed by a Q&A session with the audience. As they're speaking, attendees can feel free to post questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And then once we get to the Q&A session, I'll read out your questions to the speakers. So now I will turn it over to Dr. Ruth Wilson Gilmore to open the conversation. Welcome to you both.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, everybody who's made this conversation possible, particularly Damien Sojourner and Yusuf Al-Balushi for having had the vision to convene this important series of conversations over the course of a year. Thank you to everybody whose name is showing on the screen right now who've done important work to move the conversation forward. And especially thank you, Comrade Spoo, for being in conversation with me. I'm very happy for us to be here together. So the way I've organized things, I'll tell our audience, is I'm going to move our conversation forward by asking a series of questions, and we'll see how the conversational part unrolls. But let me get started. So Comrade Spoo, we met at your offices there in Durban last December. Craig and I had already met with many people at Abahlali communes in Greater Johannesburg, where we had several meetings, workshops, and celebrations in the villages, as well as at the Forge. Of course, not all self-built communities are part of Abahlali, but Abahlali grew from particularly understood struggles over land, housing, materials, and public goods. Would you be kind enough to share a broad history of the movement?
Thank you so much, Comrade Prof. Ruth, for this wonderful introduction. But I also want to extend my gratitude to Dr. Yusuf, who has kindly extended this invitation to Abahlali, who in turn, Abahlali entrusted me with this responsibility to represent them. I also want to thank the team that has actually put this wonderful webinar together. Also the University of California for really providing us a space to interact, but also the thought-provoking series of conversations that have began in these seminars. Prof, Abahlali were really humbled and honored to host you in Durban and KwaZulu-Natal and host you, but also to have a moment taking you around our settlement and so on. But just to give you a background about Abahlali, we are almost 18 years old, meaning Abahlali is not a fly-by-night. It is a movement that has track records. Not only track record, but we have scars on our back. The journey has been very long, I must say. Abahlali began in 2005 in the Kennedy Road settlement in the port of Durban. Now, when Abahlali started, really, it was out of anger, hunger, and frustration that the community came together and realized that we were on our own. And how it began, it was a piece of land that was promised to the residents of Kennedy Road. And from the onset, promises made, promises were broken, and the lies were put before the truth, but also profit was put before human needs. So when the movement was started, really, it was formed to fight for, protect, promote, and advance the interest and the dignity of the shared dwellers and the impoverished. So I'm primarily focusing on land, decent housing, and dignity. I must say that the movement has made a remarkable progress in terms of advancing those rights. I can tell you, when we started, we were nobody. We were treated as if we were beneath the law. We were treated as if we have no brain. We cannot think ourselves. But I can tell you, the movement has really got some kind of respect to a certain degree, that the voice is beginning to really help the shared dwellers to shape and reshape this country. So this is pretty much a background that the movement has now grown. We are over 100,000 membership through at least 5 provinces of this country, making Abahlali one of the largest social movements to have emerged in post-apartheid South Africa. So we are very humbled that the voice that began so small and faced a lot of violence was able to resist, was able to, build out of those difficulties. And now I can tell you, we all have hope. Abahlali has become endless and homeless in this country.
Thank you so much. The story that you tell is an extremely inspiring story. And what I know, and what I'd like us to talk about a bit, is how the long journey happened through constant struggle for people to come into the movement, to find their place in the movement, to build their role in the movement. So for example, everywhere I traveled in KwaZulu-Natal and also in Gauteng province, everywhere, there were women and there were young people of all genders in leadership, as well as, of course, many, many men. So can you discuss the deep democratic principles that have shaped Abahlali's social, spatial, political, and participatory evolution?
Oh, yes. First of all, I think it's really important to note that the membership of Abahlali has gone so high, but at least 60% of Abahlali's membership is women. So women are making the larger part of our membership, meaning that the women are expected to play a very meaningful role in the leadership and, of course, in shaping Abahlali. This is what we have seen. And the democratic culture that Abahlali has cultivated over the years has been to put women at the center of our struggle. And we have learned and actually noted the power that has been shown by women in particular. When we protest, for instance, sometimes you'll find men parking on the pavement of the road, and women are doing the real work. And the courage that is there has actually made this movement grow. And I have no doubt that the growth of Abahlali has been through the work of the women within the organization. So Abahlali has developed a culture of democratic principles, and the nature of the movement really puts women at the heart of the organization, to a point that Abahlali has managed back in 2008, 3 years after its formation, it was able to actually create what we call a women's league, which became a very safe space for women to articulate issues that affect women, but also it has become a safe space for women to really engage their counterpart, men, in terms of the reality that we continue to face, where of patriarchy in particular. So that space within the Women's League has actually helped women to build and to empower them so that they can really be able to be leaders in the movement, but also as they do in their communities, but also in their families. But also on the other hand, we have a youth league also acknowledging that the priorities of young people are not necessarily the priorities of everyone else. What may be a priority to me as an elderly may not necessarily be that of young people. So within the youth league also, it's a space for young people to engage among themselves on issues that are of interest to them, and they are able to filter that within the organization. But more importantly, if you were to invite Abahlali like today, you know, when you invite Abahlali, you would expect an answer tomorrow. But the answer would that Abahlali needs to consult. Abahlali needs to decide who will represent the movement. So that has become the culture that you must have a mandate. That is why I'm confident here. I know my secretary and my deputy and other leaders are participating. Imagine if I did not have such a mandate to represent the organization. So that democratic culture has really shaped and helped the movement to democratize settlements as well, because we are a movement that believes in a democracy from below. The communities elect their leaders at the community level. So it's up to community who becomes their leaders, but also at the national level, you must be in good standing. You must be a member of Abahlali, and it must be your community that elect you or nominate you to represent you at Abahlali Elective Congress. So, and of course, there are many ways in which we advance this democratic praxis. Every month we have what we call general assemblies that are open to all members, but also to new members who can actually pop in and just sit and listen to what is going on and have a voice. So, so we're always able to recruit new members who will actually attend these meetings because they are open to everyone. So these democratic practices have really helped the movement to grow in a manner that it has become, but leaders are accountable to their members. The organization does not belong to its leaders, it belongs to its members. We've seen this in many ways. There were moments where the membership said we no longer have confidence in you as leaders, and eventually forced us to step down. All of us as leaders were once told we no longer have confidence in you. So that has helped Abahlali, the movement, to sustain itself when the movement belongs when the movement belongs to its members as opposed to it belonging to its leaders.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Have there been, this is a follow-up on that final point that you made, which is so interesting and inspiring. Can you share with us some of the ways that the debates unfold, you know, when there is some discomfort on the part of the membership with leadership, how that transition actually occurs so that leaders don't hold on, or that members don't feel that they can't express themselves? It would be great if you could give an example without going into too much detail.
Oh, yes, no, absolutely. You know, the membership of Abahlali is renewed annually, every year. So each time you enter into a leadership position, from the onset, you are told that you have 12 months in office. If you are a local leader, which we call them local council, if you are a provincial leader, then you have at least a 2-year term of office. If you are a national leader, you have a 3-year term position, so that there's no resistance. There comes the time when you are no longer re-elected. As challenge of people resisting to this has been, a practice. It has been a culture that you serve with dignity. The opportunity to serve Abahlali is always an honor when people trust you and trust you with so much responsibility. We receive those news with so much of honor, to a point that we know when to stop. And of course, Abahlali are there to remind you that actually we put you there, and you have to be a responsive leader in a way. So we've never really had a challenge, of that. So each time just like in the next week, we will be having the KwaZulu-Natal Elective Congress. So already different branches are having a conversation meetings at the grassroots level, at the branch level. So it's the community then that decides on the delegate to the elective Congress, and it's the communities also that decide on the candidates that are going to represent them. So if you are a leader, you must come from a settlement. You must somehow come from a community who would have elected you. And when that happens, then you are accountable to that community and to a broader movement, as opposed to, accounting to an individual somewhere above. So leaders accounts to members and below. That is to respect the people that have actually put you there, and you have no other option but to honor the opportunity that they have given you to serve.
This is really an amazing set of practices that sound very straightforward until you stop and think about how much actual political and practical consciousness goes into the everyday of the movement. Whatever else people do, they are always also making Abahlali by way of making their home place and making their communities. And this certainly is, to me, an example in the 21st century of what Du Bois was describing in the 19th century when he talked about abolition democracy, that this is indeed an archipelago, if you will, of abolition geographies that have come into being and consolidate and also operate semi-autonomously at once. It's very, very exciting, and a lot of lessons for people who are trying to think hard about the relationship between local organizing, local struggle, which is always essential, and then the capacity to build power to achieve what we want for our lives over and over again. So having that in mind turns me to another question, and that is, of course, every movement falters. A movement falters not only in the face of violence, which of course arises in order to stop or to distract or distort movements, but also sometimes in the wake of success, that partial successes in which people achieve something that for others or for the movement is a step on the road, not the destination, encourages people to relax, to step away from the daily work for reasons that we can understand. So have you learned over the 18 years that you've been involved in the movement that whether there are specific ways that different groups of people become attached to Abahlali in the first place, who want to stay part of the protracted struggle, even in the face of the dangerous fights, whether there are some issues that are more attractive for some than others, whether it's electrification or water or schools or clinics or sanitation. How have you thought about that over time?
Oh, yes, absolutely. That is quite an interesting question for me because we work on that almost every day. So it's very important to say that democracy is slow. Building a strong foundation takes time. So Abahlali is very clear, and we are deliberate that we are building a future society, but how we build this future society has to be reflected in our day-to-day thinking and action. So how do we sustain the movement? We actually have 3 strategies and tactics how we engage that question. One is to, out of those 3 strategies, one is called the political strategy or the people's power. It's the art of organizing. We make sure as a first step that we build the power of the impoverished from below. How do we do that? Through series of popular education methodologies in trying to make sure that the working class and the poor in general realize the power that they have when they are together, when they are acting in unity. So, and that the only weapon that they have as poor and the working class people is their unity in diversity, is solidarity, is building this power of solidarity within and between struggling communities. So we call that the people's power. But the second strategy, obviously, is the use of the media, making sure that we expose the injustices that happens. And in many ways, those that are in power would not want to be embarrassed, would not want to be seen as failures, would not want to be seen as violating the rights that they are meant to be the custodians of. But the third strategy is litigation. Now, how do we play the game? We know that some people would be joining Abahlali suddenly because they want lawyers. We happen to have good lawyers from the Socio-Economic Right Institute who works with Abahlali so profoundly. So what we do, we take the members through these 3 strategies. We make sure that before they get into the litigation, in other words, before they get hold of lawyers, they would have seen the world through a different eye, through a different lens. For instance, if you have come to Abahlali because you are facing evictions and you want lawyers, we make sure that before you actually get a lawyer, you would have been educated, you would have been conscientized, you would have been able to see a word in a broader sense. In other words, you'll be able to have seen life beyond just evictions that you may be facing at that point in time. So to keep Abahlali within the organization, we make sure that they see that right now. We give them a broader sense of understanding their life, what has created this poverty in the first place, why they are facing the challenges that they often face. So in other words, we have methods within the organizations. We educate ourselves through a number of strategies so that people are able to see the future in a much more broader and brighter eyes that would make them to even stay in Abahlali beyond the legal challenges that may have brought them in Abahlali. So we make sure that we change the mindset through our popular education, through our organizing, through community meetings, through protests, through litigations. People then understand that struggle is a school. So when you are at school, you learn sometimes beyond what you see in the classroom. So school, then the struggle is a school. So by the time you graduate, you see a bigger world. That is why there are moments where Abahlali takes decision that some would say socialism or death. They have reached a point of understanding the agency that they all need. So those are some of the strategies that Abahlali used to make sure that people remain in the organizations. And of course, everyone feels important, everyone is valued in Abahlali, but most importantly, Abahlali has become a family. We take time to build family values. If you were to have a good and a better society tomorrow, there has to be good family values that are installed in order to create a good neighborhood, a good city, good citizen, good society. So these values, I mean, we spend a lot of time defining our humanity, what makes a better humanity, what makes you a better person. Take time to define what a person is in relation to others, and that there's no person that is complete in isolation to others, meaning that we all need one another, one way or the other. We are dependent on one another. So it's important, therefore, that we build these family values, because Abahlali is becoming a family. That's where you draw your hope and your inspiration. So some members are church people. They will tell you when they are with Abahlali, they feel even their spirituality being fulfilled. So Abahlali is just a welcoming organization. So once you get there, it's really hard to get out, because that's where you find your brothers and your sisters. That's where you find your mothers. That's where you find people that you can actually rely on in these difficult circumstances in which people find themselves.
Mm-hmm. One of the experiences that really moved me, actually all the experiences I had while I was with you last November and December moved me, but a major experience was when we were visiting one of the communes just outside of Johannesburg. And we'd gone to one first and walked around, met people in leadership, toured the gardens, looked at the creche, that kind of thing. Then we got in the taxis and went to the next place where we were going to have a meeting, a discussion, an open discussion with people who came. And as you described, people who participated in the discussion did not have to be members of Abahlali or one of the invited guests. Anybody could speak. But in the course of our time together, part of that time was devoted to, and I mean devoted, to singing, to several choirs sang very beautifully and in a good way, quite competitively. And in other words, we're working very hard to bring more beauty into the room. That's what I mean by competitively. Not to win something, but to be making as much beauty as possible with their voices and their songs. And similarly, some quite young people, kids, maybe 10 years, 11 years, 12 years old, did some very competitive dancing. That was fantastic. And again, the competition wasn't for a prize. There was no prize, other than the prize of all of us having a feeling of being together that otherwise we would not have had. And that feeling, as much as the more, how do I want to put it, the more didactic parts of our program, where we explain to one another how we understand things, contributed to conscientization of the entire community and everyone, including me, who happened to be present. So thinking together about how we think together, I thought maybe we could turn our attention a little bit to the analytical part of the ongoing work that Abahlali is doing. and how the movement analyzes and works through various categories and factors, which are all complicated and all full of peril. For example, the murderous policing regimes, and there are layers of cops whose remit is eviction. And I'm telling to the US audience, you have no idea. Layers and layers of cops who do eviction. Those cops no longer serve an apartheid elite, but rather a capitalist elite that is Black as well as white and brown. On the other hand, many of the public goods that people want to secure and enhance their everyday lives in the communities, whether it's water, electrification, or other things I've mentioned, schools, clinics, sanitation, are all in the hands of the state, whether municipal or provincial or central state. So, and yet, and I mentioned the cops earlier, not all the cops are state cops. Many of them are private contractors. So can you discuss some of these contradictions, how Abahlali goes about thinking about the state, thinking about the racism that created the conditions that people in South Africa are fighting through, but the conditions are not identical to pre-94? I think you might have frozen. Uh-oh. I think my comrade might have frozen. Yusuf, can you send a message to Spoo, please?
Yeah, let me follow up with him. Thanks everyone for bearing with us as we.
Yes,
Wait.
Can you hear us
I
again?
got you.
Okay.
Oh,
He'll be back. Don't leave, anybody. Not over.
Yeah. As I was saying, thanks everyone for bearing with us as we deal with these technical challenges. We may ask Sbu to turn off his video when he comes back so that we can ensure the connection is okay, but he'll be back in just a bit.
He will definitely be back. And I mean, people can go hydrate quickly, but those who are not, I just want to reflect on the fact that it's amazing that we can all be talking to one another through these technologies, from the Indian Ocean to the Pacific Ocean, long way round. I'm pretty close to the Atlantic. It's right down the river here. And yet we also know, because we all are conscientized about this, that the materials that produce the possibilities for these conversations are also the conflict materials that our comrades in places like DRC and Chile and Bolivia are fighting to get control of. Those resources, conflict and other, that go into the making of our capacity to build together. So this is also part of internationalism in practice, is thinking about that and doing what we can to support even something that sounds as difficult to grasp as resource nationalism, as a step toward the world we want and need. Let's see if our friend will be back.
Yeah, as we wait for him to come back, and I think maybe the internet was rebooted a couple times while we were doing the setup for this event. So thanks everyone for your patience. But that's a great point, Dr. Gilmore, about the material realities behind what connects us across vast distances. And it was so wonderful to hear you share with Sbu a little bit about your visit and what you took away from your time there. I don't know if you would want to share a little bit more now with our audience, just in terms of the basics of where you were able to go exactly, and some of what you took away from these visits. I know you mentioned a particular visit in Johannesburg just now.
Sure, I'm happy to share. As I think I mentioned earlier, Craig, my partner, Craig Gilmore, and I were hosted by our comrades in Abahlali, and we visited several communities in Greater Johannesburg as well as in Greater Durban, just speaking roughly, and talked with people and engaged in workshops and had meetings as well in central places such as the Forge in Johannesburg and Braamfontein, which is not very far from the University of Witwatersrand. And in these various gatherings, we had lots of conversation about how people struggle. And I don't mean conversation about the modes of victimization, although that is part of it, but rather how people struggle as the protagonists of history. And this is a good moment for us to bring Sbu back, because I said the magic words, the protagonists of history. Comrade, I think you're muted.
Yes. Am I audible? Very sorry to our audience as well. The system can be very jealous at times. But just to start off by saying, you have alluded on how you were welcome, the use of arts and culture, music, and so on in the movement as part of the culture of the movement is really exciting. Abahlali has developed its own culture that is able to bind us together, as a family. So whenever we are together, we are happy. And we use those together moments to forget a little bit about all the suffering and the challenges that we face. Because when we are together, it has to be nice, it has to be exciting, because that's what families are about. So the music keep Abahlali together. There are a couple of women's music group in Abahlali, including the Abahlali Choral Choir. We have one in Johannesburg and Tembisa. There's also one in Durban. These women sings very nice because it comes from heart. It is with love, it is with passion. It keeps us together, and we forget really about all the suffering and the trouble that we face because the use of culture really help us to really bond, but also rethink of new strategies. So we spend a bit of time in doing that, but also remember, we also have young people that you cannot just bore them with politics. So you must be entertaining. When you have to change the mindset and when you want to send the message across, and it gets to be taken seriously. Entertainment part has to be part of that, so that while people enjoy, you slowly deal with them, with the mindset and instilling the seed of Abahlali. So that's one area that I thought I should start off with. But coming to your main question, it is very disappointing, I must say, as you've mentioned, all kinds of security forces, that is the South African Police Services, it's your public order police, it's your intelligence units, it's your metro police. Now our cities have even created their own private security guards. In Johannesburg, they are known as the Red Ants. In the city of Cape Town, they are known as the law enforcement agencies. In eThekwini and Durban, they are known as land invasion units. They also have health and security and family, private security companies. Now, all these militarized formations are unfortunately an insult to our democracy. They are a disgrace to our democracy. And that is what happens when the leadership has failed. You replace what is supposed to be democratic dispensation into a military or into a police governance where police take over the administration. There is now a belief that the poor can only be ruled and be governed by violence. And this is very concerning, I must say, because on the one hand, we are dreaming of a kind society that is welcoming, that is open to the world, that, you know, embrace humanity. But on the one hand, the state is militarizing, the state is becoming violence. And we've seen in South Africa, in Durban and in Johannesburg, what became known as the riot protests that happened in July 2021, how the anger of the people is now manifesting itself in different ways. And that is worrying. So we never thought that in a new democratic dispensation, you would have the very same ways as the apartheid state that saw a Black person as an animal to be treated with so much disrespect. So it is very disappointing. So we really see this as really an insult and a shame that we are not seen as people who are reasonable, who can be engaged meaningfully, who can be respected. So the level of violence tells you that people are not treated as human beings. So when you govern, rule, raise people with violence, what kind of a society are you creating? What do you expect that the communities can actually become? So that is worrying, because on the one hand, we are building a society that we want, which is really a society where everyone is respected, where everyone's dignity and where everyone's rights and humanity ought to be respected. On the one hand, contrary to that, the state is creating something else. So it is concerning that you see Black people. I mean, we've seen this. In order for them to realize that they are in charge, they use this muscular, they don't feel being in charge without laying a hand on somebody. So that's what happens when you govern, when you are no longer governing with brain. You don't use your brain to govern, but that's what happens when your mental capacity reaches its maximum capacity. People tend to resort to violence. Now you see this on some people within the state actually failing to govern. Their state of mind quickly reaches its maximum capacity, and they resort to violence. And that is dangerous to any society.
Wow.
So that goes without saying, sorry, Ruth, it goes without saying why Abahlali has lost 24 activists and it is business as usual, because the lives of poor Black folks do not matter. It goes without saying why whistleblowers, human rights defenders, why even traditional leaders in this country, particularly in this province of KwaZulu-Natal, are killed with impunity. And the state does nothing about this matter. So, if someone that comes from the wealthy family is facing violence or criminality, then the state is easy to quickly respond to that. This is what we have seen. That is why just 2 weeks ago we had this huge march, and part of our demand was to call the Minister of Police to step down, that he must go, because he has suddenly become the minister of elites. He's supposed to be
Boo, sorry to interrupt. We're having trouble hearing you.
Making sure
I'm
that
wondering if you can turn off your video.
Irrespective of their socioeconomic backgrounds, regardless of their color, creed, gender, and that's when Black poor lives matter in our.
It looks like we've lost him again. When he comes back, we'll ask him maybe to turn off his video, and hopefully that'll solve the audio problems.
But I'm going to take this opportunity to raise up a really profound political point that Comrade Sbu made in his answer. He talked at length about how the various forces of organized violence of the state come together, concentrate to suppress and kill poor people, especially poor Black people. And further, Comrade Sbu talked about how that expression of organized violence in its many manifestations, both public and contracted, across the country, are what it is, if anything, is holding the current neoliberal state together. Now, what we were discussing earlier with Comrade Sbu was how the processes of democratic decision-making from the ground up are what hold Abahlali together. So that gives us a direct view into what it is that, for example, abolitionists are talking about when we're saying no more police. We're not saying let people thwack each other, but rather, how do we hold ourselves together? How do we hold ourselves together and build a future that we want? What are the principles of solidarity that work? We heard about that. Now, I can tell you for sure that plenty of people who are part of the movement there in South Africa today would push back against me when I say, how about no police? Because there still are all kinds of vulnerabilities that people experience for which at the moment there seems not to be any other recourse. And yet, what we keep learning is when that's the only recourse, then the answer to everything becomes violence. And the form of speech that's most actively used, whether informally in households and neighborhoods or formally by states in relation to communities, is violence. So this is my opportunity to put in a few words on that topic and what it means to be in charge without imagining that to be in charge means, as Comrade Sbu said, to lay hands on somebody. And that's something that we can take from the most intimate level of the domestic sphere all the way out to the global sphere. What does it mean to be a leader without laying hands on somebody? These are the questions. Okay, here's my comrade.
Yes, Sbu, I think you've turned off your video, which is great. I think that'll make the audio work a little bit better. As much as we love being able to see your face, at least we've gotten it for a little part of this conversation. And once you're unmuted, we'll be able to return to the conversation. But I think it is a good idea to keep the video off, as that will probably improve the audio.
Yes, no, thank you so much. My apology once again. Sorry, you won't be seeing these handsome face, but yeah, I would love to be seen, and I would love to see everyone. That's the real world. But yes, just to conclude, is to say we are very concerned because we imagine of a world without the police. Let the people themselves police themselves, because people are responsible. We are people, we are communities, because we also believe that communities are built. And when we build our communities, we do not need any form of violence. We do not need any form of intimidation. So we hope that one day, when we build a new world, there will be no place for police, because there will be no crime, because there will be no poverty, there will be no inequality, and there will be no suffering that people continue to suffer and force some people to actually find themselves in these unwelcoming conditions, which are social ills that are really compelling people into prisons and so on.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I don't know if you heard the remarks I made while you were getting connected again, but they articulated beautifully. It's fantastic. All right, here's my last question, and then we'll open up for a little Q&A with the audience. I looked at the time. We'll have maybe about 20 minutes with for Q&A. So one of the big questions about all of us today, but especially about social movements, and particularly about social movements that are building toward socialism, is the urgency of internationalism. So I know that Abahlali has a long relationship with comrades in many places. I think you mentioned them. I think Yusuf mentioned them. So Brazil's MST, from Swaziland, from many places. And with the growing abolition movement that is also many places. I'm reminded that, of course, internationalist struggle is struggle for communism. The Ekehana commune, mostly built and led by young people, shows in its settlement design the learning that is accumulated from experience over time. It's also one of the principal targets of assassination. Many young people have been shot dead in the fields, in their homes, including Nokutulo Mbasu, whose beautiful child I met in Durban, Lindo Kule Mgunui, and Ayenda Ngila, and pardon my pronunciation. Shortly before the latter's assassination, he participated in a conversation at the Forge in Johannesburg, where he declared, to sum up the struggle and the vision, socialism or death. And I just want to remind the audience, he's no longer with us. This slogan is on t-shirts now, worn by leadership in many of the communes. The young people who survive are targets of nonstop criminalization. Would you talk with us a few minutes about how dignity and courage necessarily combine with socialism or death as we think together about working for the future from what we have now?
Yes, thank you so much for that question, Comrade Ruth. Yes, we have lost incredible leaders of our movement who were highly disciplined, but also who were really leading us to a better world and a better society. So it shows the amount of commitment, sacrifice, and being so principled that Abahlali, particularly the Kenana commune, has led the way. They have shown us, they have actually educated us that we are in what we call a do or die moment, which concludes socialism or death. So now this slogan indicates the seriousness, the commitment, the love of a society. In fact, we want to see socialism today, not tomorrow. That's the agency of it. We have suffered enough for a very long time. So almost many of us are carrying so much scars, and we carry these deep wounds that are bleeding every day. Each time we have to think about Lindo Guhle, Noktula Ayanda, Manuele, and many more who have made an ultimate sacrifice. All they wanted to see is everyone happy. All they wanted to see is everyone having equal opportunity. All they wanted to see is justice. All they wanted to see is when every man and woman, young and old, are treated with respect and dignity, and they are not judged by their socioeconomic standard or background and so on, because they are human beings. So this is what they have committed themselves to do, even if it means they die. They knew that the trajectory that Abahlali has taken would lead to this. But I can recall that Lindo Guhle once said, even if he were to be killed tomorrow and has an opportunity to wake up the following day, he will still say socialism or death. Mm-hmm. So what somehow consoled my heart in this conversation is that those who have passed on in Abahlali knew what they were doing. It was not by a mistake. It was the level of commitment. Hence, Abahlali has become a movement of courage and dignity. The overwhelming majority of membership of Abahlali did not accept threats and intimidation. They said no amount of death and threats could want us to bow to our oppression. In fact, we cannot bow into our oppression. And we do this not only for ourselves, for our children, and for the next generation. And this is the ultimate sacrifice the comrades were prepared to take. And those who continue to struggle in Abahlali, they are clear that they are struggling under the shadow of death. We have seen people being killed, but that has not made us to retreat. So the internationalism, every big event of Abahlali, including the recent Unfreedom Day March in Durban, began with the Internationale, the song that recognizes, that salutes every human being at its universality. We believe that there are no human borders. Suffering of Abahlali in South Africa, in Egypt, in Palestine, is the same blood that the poor and the working class continue to endure each time they raise the issues of justice. So Abahlali subscribe to a universal, humanity, that we are human beings wherever we find ourselves. We want to recognize that oppression is everywhere, and resistance, therefore, has to be supported, has to be recognized everywhere. Hence, solidarity is so important for Abahlali when we stand in solidarity with the people of Palestine, with the people in Latin America and everywhere. We think it's important because we know that capitalism is a global monster that requires us all to unite also at a global level. So we know that on our own as Abahlali, we do not always have all the answers. Hence, we need our neighbors, other cities, we need people in the region, but we also need our comrades, globally. So for us, this is really important because we know that it's only when we come together, we know the power that we have when we're to be able to unite and organize at a global scale. I have no doubt that the monster that we are all up against can be threatened, can actually surrender if we were to speak in one voice. Part of our prayer as Abahlali, when we sing, whether the national anthem and the internationale, is to make a worldwide call that we need one another. Unless we get to that point, we have no doubt that we will be victorious when we get to that level. So it is a call that I continue to make, and it's a call that I want to make today, that all the progressive forces, the Democrats, wherever you are, we need you, your country needs you, your world needs you. Abahlali needs you as much as you need us, and we are available. For us, internationalism and international solidarity is important. We have a very good experiences when we were repressed and attacked in 2009 in Kennedy Road, when people were killed. Suddenly there were protests in London, there were protests in Budapest in Hungary, there were protests in New York City, and guess what happened? The US State Department called us and said, what is going on? But not only those protests in these cities, but the leading scholars throughout the world, including Naomi Chomsky, Naomi Klein, and other heavy scholars actually wrote a petition that circulated throughout the world. And we know the global monster was threatened, because the question that was discussed with the US Department of State was, but how did you get hold of this bunch of people who signed this petition? We knew that we are making an impact. So with that said, global solidarity is important. Internationalism has to be forged. Socialism or death. That's the courage, the honor, the ultimate sacrifice some of us are prepared to make in order for our children and for future generations to have a better world that we all dream of.
Thank you. Thank you. I think, Joseph, if we have a few minutes, would you light yourself up and do the Q&A honors, please?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Gilmore, for facilitating that fantastic conversation. And thanks to you, Sabu, for a wonderful series of responses. We've got a number of questions in the Q&A, and I want to invite our audience member, who I should note are tuning in from all around the world, from South Africa, from Europe, from across the United States. So it's wonderful to see many of you on here today. So please feel free to post your questions in the Q&A box that you have for either of our speakers or for both of them. I think we can start with one from Sibahle, who says, thank you for the lovely conversation. It's refreshing hearing from Abahlali. Could you please tease out some of the relations, tensions, and challenges between land trusts, for example, the Ingonyama Trust in rural areas, the former homelands under apartheid and colonialism, and Abahlali's work and relationships with other movements, such as the Poor People's Alliance in these areas? How does Abahlali navigate and negotiate the violent and deadly relationships with traditional leadership that has custodianship of land with the idea of inhlonipho, respect, in mind? How do you see Abahlali's work not only concerned with urban spaces, but with rural areas where a lot of urban dwellers come from and have been evicted to, as well as evicted from, and have to navigate relationships with traditional leaders alongside the state relations that you've spoken about?
Should I come in?
Please do.
Yeah. Yes, well, this is quite a mouthful question from Sibahle. Thank you so much for that. Well, because Abahlali is much more focused on urban land, we have really not interacted much with the traditional leadership, but however, we have been able to forge some kind of relationship, especially in areas like Gwandeng is somewhere in Maran Hill, which is semi-rural. So there was a situation where the municipality claimed to own the land, and they have actually built low-cost housing on the land that was actually owned by the Ngonyama Trust. The Ngonyama Trust is really a land that is traditionally owned by His Majesty the King. So we were able to work together very well with the king, because what happened was that the king was very unhappy, and all the traditional leadership were unhappy that the municipality imposed these housing development without seeking the permission of the king to use the land. And therefore, when these houses were built, imposed on people, built on the graveyards of people, built on the premises of other families, without really those families benefiting. So we had a very good engagement with the traditional leadership, with Inkosi Ushodzi, for instance, to say we were concerned that neither Abahlali communities were concerned, nor the traditional leaderships were concerned. And because sometimes the state sees itself as the, as the only voice that they can actually impose everything. So we're able to really approach the Ngonyama Trust to actually give us the proof that the land was actually owned by the Ngonyama Trust, meaning it was traditionally owned and it was not owned by the municipality, yet they had built houses there. So that's where Tulin Lovu was murdered, one of our chairperson. She was leading that struggle, saying, yes, we do need housing, but not in an imposed manner that we have seen. And the corruption that actually took place there. So far, I would, say the relationship between Abahlali and traditional leadership is good in many ways, I guess, because our focus is really on urban land, which is to a large extent is owned by state organs as opposed to traditional leadership. In rural areas, we do not have, challenge with land. There's, of course, enough land in rural areas, so it's not really an issue. So, yeah, but we have relationship with other movements, such as the past. Now we have the Coalition of the Poor, but we also have the Durban Coalition. We, at the local level, but also we work with other organizations at the regional level, but also globally. We are part of the big network. One of that is called the ESCR, which is the Economic, Social, and Cultural Right Network, which has over 70 countries that are part of the network, and there's about 300 organizations that are part of this global network, which is really helpful in building solidarity at the international level, and we are heading to what I've just spoken in the challenges that are facing global working class. So yes, we see a need to identify allies and build more alliances with the working class and progressive forces. That's the only way we can actually consolidate the power that the working class and the poor have.
Thank you for that. And Dr. Gilmore, I should say, if you want to chime in on any of these, please feel free to. We have another question here from Nigel Gibson, a scholar of Frantz Fanon, and who's written a lot about Abahlali as well. And maybe since I think I heard Sabu's connection was a bit choppy towards the end there, he has a question both for Sabu and for Professor Gilmore. Maybe we'll start with the question for Professor Gilmore. He says, you mentioned Du Bois, but since Abahlali is a bottom-up democratic movement, how does this articulate with his notion of organization idea of the talented tenth? So maybe the relationship between abolition democracy on the one hand and the talented tenth on the other hand. And then for Sabu, he says, for Sabu Zikode, over Abahlali's 18 years, university-based intellectuals have played an ambiguous, sometimes reactionary role in their relations with Abahlali. I wonder whether you can articulate some of the organization's thinking, which would be important, I think, for today's university audience. So we'll start with Dr. Gilmore, and then we'll pass it over to Sabu.
Okay. Thank you for that question, colleague. You know, it's unfortunate that Du Bois seems in many people's intellectual imagination to be frozen in the time when he wrote that sentence, as though there had been no intellectual, political, and moral development between that time and the time that he wrote, for example, Black Reconstruction in America. So Black Reconstruction in America, a long book, which you should read all of, does not in the least linger on that clever turn of words that he used decades earlier to describe what he thought might be the case of how the future of Philadelphia, the Philadelphia Negro, might progress. So, you know, Du Bois died a communist. He died a communist in Ghana. He was the first known communist to be put on a US postage stamp. This is the lovely thing about symbolic reparation that is never real. It's the US Post Office put Du Bois, known communist, on the stamp, thinking it would make all the Black people happy, because maybe most of us would only know about the talented tenth and not about his communism. So it's very easy to reconcile. He outgrew that way of thinking, which also, in my view, never wholly shaped his thinking at the time. It was, I think, a rather empirical view. Having looked around what was happening in Philadelphia, he saw that there seemed to be a fraction of people who had had opportunities, educational and so forth, to be able to do things that maybe other people couldn't do. Too bad it turned into that phrase, the talented tenth. So that's a long answer, and I hope you take it in the spirit intended.
Sabu, we'll turn it over to you for the question about relationship between the movement and university-based intellectuals and how the movement navigates this.
Yes, no, thanks. It's good to hear from Comrade Nigel. We respect the work that he has done, you know, in contributing to help us unpack and challenge the thinking of Frantz Fanon in particular, which was discovered many years ago, and it's becoming a reality today. Well, Abahlali has fought many battles. We have not only fought against the state, but there are a number of regressive forces that have undermined and insulted Abahlali. There has been a thinking that poor Black folks cannot think for themselves. Somebody else, somewhere else, has to think for them. We have had this idea from some academic corners who think that it is their duty to think for us. And we have rejected the idea that we cannot think for ourselves. And we have made enemies for that. Hence, about the University of Abahlali was created. And we said we will create our own university. In other words, there would be knowledge production within the organization, because we understand that our struggle is a school in many ways, and many of us have graduated from the University of Abahlali. And that is why the University of California has recognized that we could contribute to this important discussion. So we have rejected the idea that we cannot think of ourselves because some NGOs, some academics had the tendency that they should be the one who represent the poor in the international platforms and in platforms such as these. And at the time, the thinking was that Abahlali is going to collapse because there must be a vanguard somewhere at certain university that has to drive and provide leadership and guidance for these poor folks. And that has been an insult. And we know some of our comrades within the same spaces, university spaces, have really fought so hard and paid a high price for defending the idea that we can think for ourselves. And today, I'm happy, as you may see, almost everyone sees that Abahlali has emerged victoriously over these conversation, over this tension. So there's no doubt, I think even those who thought in the past that they could control us, if they cannot control us, therefore they should destroy us, accept the reality now that we have the capacity, we have produced organic intellectuals within the Abahlali. So it's important that we respect that poor folks can also think. And what Abahlali has done in these past 18 years indicate that some of the writings that have been published by famous academics and professors, today it's proven that they were wrong. And we see some of them are really now coming back to Abahlali slowly, giving a bit of a respect that they were proven wrong. Some did not imagine that Abahlali would still survive 18 years later. We know movement comes, they rise and they fall. I remember some of these, published, pieces. One talks about the rise and the fall of Abahlali. And some of those people who thought Abahlali would have collapsed at this stage are really shy when they see the same voice that they were trying to destroy is getting louder and louder and louder again. So yes, we are able to maintain this tension. They are not a threat to us. We can prove, and because we have seen that this is what often happens when loosey cannons, subject themselves, to be the only voice that can actually provide leadership and become the vanguard of the popular masses on the ground. I think we are slowly winning that battle, because we are not saying we have all the answers, but we rely on the day-to-day thinking and experiences of people. We don't just think that we have answers on the challenges that we all face. That is why everyone has a role within Abahlali. The academics have their role. NGOs and all other civil society have their role in the struggle. So everyone is welcome. I think we should just live with that everyone is required if we were to win the battle that confronts the working class.
Wonderful. We've got a couple other questions here, and feel free to keep posting them into the chat, the Q&A box. I also want to read out a few people who just commented shout outs here, so we know who is in the room. Sikona Kunene says that they're about to lose power due to scheduled power cuts in South Africa. They enjoyed the talk so much. Internationalism is the answer. Zikona from NUMSA, again, thanks for the discussion. It's provoking and agitating. And Chepo Mandingozi said, what a rich conversation. Thank you so much, Chepo Mandingozi in Johannesburg. Marie Hutchermeyer is here, one of the most important scholars of informal settlements in South Africa and Africa. And Luyanda Fichane says, myself, I just want to say ABM changed our life in Germiston, East Rand. We learn resistance, Ubuntu, and believe that we can stand for self, us as impoverished people. Maybe the next question we can field builds off a little bit of what you were talking about, Subbu. Chantal Christopher says, what are Abahlali's learnings from the Frantz Fanon Political School in Ekenana?
Yes, thanks, Chantal, for that wonderful question. What Abahlali are learning in Ekenana is really building an alternative to the challenge that faces humanity today. In South Africa, at this point in time, there's high rate of unemployment, there's poverty, there's inequality, social ills, but many people are unemployed. So the Ekenana commune is built to actually, first of all, to acknowledge and accept that the government is not doing anything about our situation, and therefore we must take charge of our own life and be able to build a commune. What does this entail? One, it has created the food sovereignty project, where a community garden is being built to make sure that no one goes hungry, because they know the danger of an empty stomach. You find yourself having to subject yourself to all kinds of problems just because you are hungry. So they wanted to master that they own and they control their food, because if they don't do so, then an empty stomach is likely to find itself in wrong places. But also the school has been created, named after Fanon, to educate ourselves. That what the comrades in the Ekenana will tell you. We want to educate ourselves because as a nation, as a community, it's important that we know our weaknesses. Some of us are not aware of the political battle we are waging. So in this school, people were inspired by the thinking of Frantz Fanon. And you can actually see the level of commitment that they are actually will read the books, and you know, from Frantz Fanon. They will invite people who would help them unpack the contemporary politics in relation to what was discovered a long time ago. And they would also make sure that Frantz Fanon is becoming the level 1 kind of class, because there are other schools. We have Nkrumah School, for instance, but before you go to Nkrumah School, you must have graduated at the Frantz Fanon School before you attend the regional one, the Amilcar Cabral School, and also the one in Brazil. So we are building cadres in these spaces ourselves, but we have an opportunity also where we are able to invite some comrades who are learned, comrades like Comrade Nigel Gibson, who have really are main scholars of Frantz Fanon. But comrades will tell you that they were inspired by many things that were taught and inspired by Frantz Fanon in order for the school to be named after Frantz Fanon.
Okay, well, I think we're gonna try to close it out with one more question, if that's okay. I know that we're so appreciative that Dr. Gilmore has joined us in the middle of her incredibly busy schedule. And we know that Comrade Subbu is also up late now in South Africa time. But we're gonna try to wrap together, if possible, 4 questions that are all dealing with a similar issue that I think the audience members are posing to both of you. This question of different forms of solidarity, how one builds across differences. Two versions of this question come from two brilliant graduate students in global studies here at UCI. Johansson Pico says, thank you, Dr. Gilmore and Sabu, for this hopeful conversation, building toward a future we all need. Both my community and research commitments center national democratic movements in the Philippines and its diaspora. And I would love to hear both of your thoughts on what you view as the most difficult barriers to overcome when attempting to forge transnational solidarities and movements. And he says, Sabu, I was so moved by your closing statements, acknowledging that we all need each other to build this brighter world together. And I'm eager to witness and contribute to this vision. So what are the most difficult barriers to building solidarities? And Alex Pina says, such an interesting conversation. Thank you both so much. If there's time, I'd love to hear your thoughts on formality in relation to organizing and or pushing movements forward. Do you think that organizing must necessarily be organized? Is there a place for disorganization in building solidarities or approaching the challenges of developing coalitions? So the relationship between organization and disorganization in building solidarity. And then Priscilla Ferreira, who is coming to us, I think, from Brazil, a brilliant scholar, Black geographer, somebody who I think may be sending you all invitations, both of you, to join conversations around global Black geographies. And as thank you to the speakers for this inspiring conversations. In reference to Ruthie's point on the urgency of internationalism, could the speakers share some thoughts on experiences or models of international redistribution of economic resources in support of international movements of solidarity in independent and sustained ways, outside of the nonprofit industrial complex, for instance? So how do we build solidarity, material solidarity, sharing, redistributing resources in support of international movements as one mode of being in solidarity with one another? And then a final question from Marie Hutchermeyer, again, on a version of solidarity. I've learned so much from Abahlali and Sabu over the past 5 years. Nigel's question covered me, but if there's a moment, could Sabu and Ruth reflect on how students of the conventional universities can connect with the University of Abahlali? Warm greetings in solidarity. So 4 questions. Hopefully that's not too much because they're all on the topic of solidarity in some shape or form. What's the biggest challenge to building solidarity? Does building solidarity always have to be organized? Is there a role for disorganization? How do we provide material economic resources to international movements as one example of solidarity? And how can students in formal universities connect and build solidarity with the University of Abahlali? So I'll let the two of you take any aspect of those that you'd like as a part of our final question.
Should I start? I think I should, because I think Comrade Sabu should have the last word, whatever it is. Thank you all for these great questions, and thank you, Prof. Yusuf, for putting them together. And they are indeed all asking in one way or another about solidarity. I think maybe I should start by saying that for me, solidarity is radical dependency. That's what it is. It's not allyship or any of those other military metaphors that people put forward to think about together in the world, because that form of together always suggests that when we're done with whatever the campaign is, then we go back to our separate issue homes, rather than we're making a world that we're going to inhabit together wherever it is we lay our heads. Those are two different ways of thinking the same thing. So radical dependency is the goal, and we build it bit by bit. So just to reflect briefly on the first question, certainly there are many barriers to, and the question was framed as transnational, which is a little different from international, but not time to talk that through now. But transnational solidarity we can see in the examples of, for example, long distance migrants from the Philippines who work all over the planet in many different areas, especially here in the United States in the Empire of Care, as Kathy Sinisa Choi put it, and elsewhere in nursing and construction and all of the things that they do, that there is already existing a possible infrastructure that people are, I think, little by little turning into something more robust. So that solidarity stretches across space, sometimes through the actual embodied experience of individual workers, but collectivized so that we think about the fact that the remittances that the Philippines depends on brings into that dynamic all of the struggles that, for example, nurses are engaged with here in the United States, fighting against global hospital corporations, fighting for Medicare for all, so that's a state fight, fighting to de-atomize their work, fighting to produce the conditions for our capacity to reproduce ourselves. So that's just like one way of thinking this big problem that you've posed. And I think that we can use our political imaginations to see other instances in which such solidarity can turn into movement building work. Nurses are doing it. Others can do it as well. Formality and versus disorganization. I think that, I don't know about disorganization, but I do know, and maybe this is at the heart of the question, that chance plays an important role in what we come upon that we then can make something of. And it is possible that too strict or mechanistic a view of organization blinds people to possibilities and opportunities that otherwise might be right in front of us. So in that sense, I'm not altogether sure I'm endorsing disorganization, but I am saying not be lockstep. And I hope that is at least a partial answer for that question. And the other two, redistribution outside the not-for-profit industrial complex. Well, we see this all the time. We see it, I talk with MST folks a lot. We see it in the circulation of seeds, as well as knowledge that is extended from the land occupations in Brazil to land occupations in South Africa to people fighting in the archipelago of Indonesia and so on and so forth. So those are forms of solidarity that also have, to some degree, resource reallocation, whether the resource is something as necessary and vital as a seed, or something as apparently intangible, but a material force such as knowledge. So those are forms of solidarity. But I just want to say, like, instead of like being all worried about the not-for-profit industrial complex, and we do have to worry, but instead of being all worried about it, remember that philanthropy is private allocation of the stolen social wage. That's what it is. So the extent to which we can steal it back and use it for other purposes, we should do that. And instead of imagining that we will be somehow pure and free by only giving our dollars to each other, as though our dollars aren't coming from some other prior theft, that we can think about ways to mindfully and carefully and with political sharpness construct possibilities that will redistribute resources without putting the brakes on the forward motion that we are trying to foster. The way I put it in a piece I wrote some time ago is take the money and run. And the final, connecting universities and not universities. Obviously, I can't speak specifically to the University of Abahlali, not yet anyway, but certainly we know that universities are central places wherever they are. Look at the amazing array of people who are there at Irvine and who are around the world. We should take very seriously that universities have been central places in the struggle for human emancipation for a very, very, very long time. The University of Dar es Salaam was such a central place. There are many of them. And instead of worrying and wringing your hands about, oh my goodness, we're in traditional universities, what about the places where the lively and dynamic stuff is happening, to think, as I think the questioner was asking, how to turn the work of our departments and programs and so forth toward the goal of opening up the possibility of learning together and thinking together. And this can be in the form of workshops, pop-up universities, which my comrades in Portugal do all the time, universities that last 3 days, and other forms of popular education where, as Sabu was saying, in the case of Frantz Fanon School and the other schools, that people really put their minds to unpacking difficult stuff. Because the point is that we are the protagonists of history, not history's victims. So thank you.
Yeah, well said, Comrade Prof. Yes, there are barriers to solidarity, but I must say that solidarity is quite a nice weight. I mean, we here in South Africa, we've named our children Solidarity. My comrade deputy president of Abahlali is a young, energetic gentleman, is called Solidarity because we felt this was so closer to our heart. And for us, there cannot be solidarity without Ubuntu. Without a sense of humor, one cannot understand, one cannot express solidarity. Now, David from the Symposium on Strength and Solidarity for Human Rights defines solidarity as a political action under other people's term. Now, that's difficult. Solidarity is a political action under other people's term. That on its own makes it a barrier, that it has to be in respect of other people's term and direction and leadership. Now, barriers could be geographic distance, it could be language, the privilege. So there are many barriers to solidarity, but I'm saying if we were to accept the definition of David, but also that of Ubuntu, then there would be a true meaning of solidarity that goes beyond the borders, language, because there are emotions and spirit. We are somehow spiritually connected, to a point that when we stand with the Palestinian in South Africa, we feel to be in Palestine. We don't need a flight to go there. So our hearts can connect. When we say our hearts, our minds are with you, we don't take that for granted. It goes beyond one wanting to pretend they can do wonders to extend solidarity. But we are saying through the humanistic connection, the spiritual connection, and expression of that, of course, there must be a way in which we express that we stand in solidarity. We don't have to go far wherever we are. It could be through our prayers, through what can, in the past, for instance, when seeing repression in other countries, we light candles, we connect, through videos, through sending messages, but through having conversation amongst ourselves that their lives matter. So we don't have to be there for them, to physically be there for them, to recognize that we acknowledge that their lives matter. I'm saying there's a lot that we can do wherever we are to express and extend solidarity, but without the sense of humor, this cannot be. Now, I ask for more solidarity because it's important, and we want to offer solidarity where it is needed because we believe it can change the world. It can isolate the enemy. It can expose the enemy. That is why today we stand in solidarity with the Socio-Economic Right Institute of South Africa here in Braamfontein, who are really facing serious threats that we will be talking about in the next few days or a week. And we'll be inviting all of you to really extend this solidarity, because there's strength in solidarity, there's hope in solidarity when you see people standing with you. But on the question of Professor Marufu Tsameya about how students can connect with the University of Abahlali, for instance, it happens in many ways. Abahlali is privileged to be able to host students from School of International Trainings. You know, if we can host students from the University of Success, from CUNY, where Professor Ruth is, why can't we host local students? We've made a number of connection with students from abroad, but it's just hard with local students, and we wonder why. So in the past, we've worked with the UNISA law students through what they called street law, and it worked out very well when, you know, students can actually be in the real world where they could interpret law in the real world and without really academizing everything. So, and it makes things easy for students to understand, but also to know why, social movements like Abahlali continue to fight. And when they get to courtrooms tomorrow, they know what the real fight is about. So it's very important that we connect with students, and we want to invite and challenge students that they avail themselves and connect with struggles, because that's where the real world, the real life that needs to be changed. When they talk about issues of justice and law, it cannot be an abstract exercise. It has to be grounded with ordinary thinking of ordinary men and women in communities. So it would really be important for students and everyone who really want to connect with social movement or progressive forces that are doing the real work. It will make their job easy, because you will find yourself thinking too much even in instances where there's ease. That's what the real work is all about. So it will really be important, and we want to welcome people who really think they can contribute, they can learn, they can teach us, because we are there to learn. That's why it's called the University of Abahlali. It's not just for us learning, but also we also want to give the knowledge that we have, because it has been tried and tested. It is real, and therefore any policy thinking that will ultimately make a difference will be the one that is grounded, that is supported by popular thinking, or by popular masses, but also by the day-to-day thinking of ordinary men and women. I just want to thank everyone that has really taken time to listen to us. We know you have important things to do, but you have really spared your time, which we really value. And this is solidarity as well. The fact that you are here, it is in its own some form kind of solidarity, not just with yourself and the organizers of the seminar, but with us all, with the word that continue to seek answers in this broken society that we all face.
Thank you, Comrade Sabu, for those final fantastic words. And thank you, Comrade Dr. Ruth Wilson Gilmore, for your words as well, for curating this fantastic conversation. Comrade Sabu, if you want to turn on your video to say goodbye, that's fine, just so people can see you, see that face one more time. And we just really appreciate everything that everybody shared today. We appreciate the audience for being here. Sorry we couldn't get to all of the questions. There were so many brilliant questions posted in the chat, but hopefully the conversation can continue, and we'll get the chance to see both of you in person, hopefully sometime soon. So thanks again to everyone, and stay tuned For future events, I'm going to post Abahlali's website one more time in the chat for people to check out. We really want to encourage you to check it out. They post their writings and updates on the movement there regularly. So thanks, everyone, solidarity, and have a good evening.
Thank you. Thank you. See you
Perfect.
soon.
Thanks, everyone.